Today we're going to be building a simple yet very capable editor for a blogging application. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you my requirements, then I'm going to show you which tools I've selected, and we're going to build out this little application. So one of my requirements is going to be we have a rich text editor. And there's two features that are very important to me. One is auto-saving my content so I don't lose any of the content, and the second one is going to be the ability to have tables. This is something I find a lot of rich text editors don't do very well. Finally, I'd like to have image uploads. This includes the ability to copy paste from my buffer and upload a file from my file system. Another thing that's important to me is redundancy, so the ability to save my files across multiple file stores. Finally, testing is very important to me. I find that testing rich text editors can be a little bit difficult at times, so this is something I'm going to factor into my choice of tool. Here's an example of the application we're going to be building. You can see we have a rich text editor with many different features, and we have the ability to have inline images. Finally, if I make a change and wait for a few seconds, it's going to automatically save my file, so I'm not going to lose any of my content. For the rich text editor, I'm going to be using Froala. This is something I've used historically in a few different applications, and I've had a really good experience. One of the things it does really well is tables, which is something that's very difficult to get right when you're building a what you see is what you get editor. For image uploads, there are a number of options. I'm going to be using Filestack. The thing I like most about Filestack is the ability to change data store very easily or even upload to multiple data stores. This gives me redundancy, which gives me confidence in my application. Finally, I found it pretty easy to test Froala, which is also something that is very important to me as well. So after we finish building this application, I'm going to go through how I write an integration test for it. Let's go ahead and get started building this application. I've created a brand new application. I'm using Vite for my dev server and Vue for my UI framework. There's a few things you need to do to get started. The first thing you need to do is include all the plugins that you'd like to use. During development, I like to use the full set of plugins just to give me access to the full feature set. You can also import plugins depending on which ones you like, and this is what I tend to do when I deploy to production. The next thing you need to do is import the styling, and finally you're going to need your integration. I'm using Vue, so I have the Vue Froala integration. Finally, you need to go ahead and install it, and that's what I'm doing down here. I'm just saying app.use and passing in Vue Froala. This will make the Froala component available across my application. Let's go ahead and see how we can render this now. I have an empty template down here, and all we need to do is go ahead and say Froala. I'm going to pass in a ref, and this is just going to give me access to the editor instance, just in case I need to do something very specific. In my experience, this is generally not necessary. The next thing I'm going to do is pass in a tag. I'm just going to say text area, and this is going to be the tag used to mount the editor. And that's all you really need to do to get started. I'm going to pass in one more thing, which is going to be the configuration, which we're going to be using in a moment. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and save this one off. And if we head back to our browser, you can see we now have an editor. Everything is going to work as you would expect out of the box. I can go ahead and say hello world, and I can even take a screenshot and paste it in. And this is something that is a requirement for my application. What's happening right now is this has been saved in the browser memory. If I go ahead and refresh the page, everything is now going to be gone. And what I'd really like to do is persist this to a server so it's there when I come back. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, but Froala makes it very easy using their save API. The options I'm interested in are going to be save interval and save URL. Let's go ahead and see how that works. The first thing we're going to do is set the save URL, and this is where our content is going to be posted to. I'm going to create this server in a moment. Finally, I'd like to save more frequently than the default of 10 seconds. I'm going to say 2 seconds in development. Let's go ahead and save this off and see how it goes. If we now head back to the browser, it's going to be exactly the same. But if I open up the network tab and go ahead and type something, after I stop typing for 2 seconds, it's going to attempt to save my content. Of course, we're going to get a 404. The reason we're getting a 404 is because we haven't created this server yet, but we are going to go ahead and create it now. We're then going to grab the payload, which is going to be the content, and we're going to persist it on a server. We're now going to shift our attention to writing a little server. To save a little bit of time, I've already written some code. I'm just using Express and Node.js. If you need a full copy of the code, you can grab it from the link in the description. We need to implement 2 endpoints. The first is going to be the save endpoint, and the second is going to be load. Let's go ahead and start with save. Just to simulate a little database, I'm going to create a new variable, and that's just going to be an empty string by default. We're going to assign our content to this, and then we're going to respond with a 204, indicating the content was saved correctly. I'm going to go ahead and say HTML is equal to request.body.body, and this is going to be the content of the post. The next thing we're going to do is say response.status, and that's going to be a 204, and then we're going to end the response. Now that we're saving the content, we also need some way to load it. So let's go ahead and do that. To simulate some database latency, which we're going to have in the real world, I'm going to go ahead and say await delay, and this is just going to wait for 1 second. Then we're going to respond with our content by saying response.json and passing in our HTML. And this is all we're going to need for our server. The next thing we need to do is ensure we're correctly loading the content on the front end. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to need a few things here. Froala is going to save the content automatically, but we are responsible for loading it ourselves. The first thing I'm going to do is create two variables. The first is going to be one to save the content of my post, and the second is going to be a loading variable, which is going to be true by default. The next thing we're going to do is create a new async function, and this one is just going to be called load. The first thing we need to do is go ahead and create a new request, so I'm just going to say window.fetch, and we're going to fetch that one from our server, which is going to be running on localhost 5555 at the load endpoint. The next thing we're going to do is grab our JSON by saying request or response.json, and finally we're going to say html.value is equal to json.html, and that's going to give us our content. Since we've finished loading, we're going to say loading.value is equal to false. Then we're going to go ahead and ensure we're calling this one immediately as soon as the application is loaded. The final thing we need to do is have a bit of a load state just to improve the user experience a little bit. We're also going to need to use our HTML as the default for our editor. The way we can do it is like this. First thing we're going to do is have a conditional to see if we're loading, and if we are, we're just going to say loading. Alternatively, we're going to go ahead and render the Froala Editor, and by default, you can put content inside of this tag. I'm just going to go ahead and say HTML, and this is going to be used as the default content for our editor. If we did everything correctly, this should now be working. Let's save it off and give it a try. Head back to my browser and refresh the page. We currently got no content, so let's go ahead and say hello world. Hopefully this is going to be saved correctly, and that is indicated by that 204. If we go ahead now and refresh the page, we are hitting the load endpoint, and that is correctly loaded and persisted. So we're now successfully saving and loading our post content. Although we're now successfully saving text content, there's one more thing we need to do to finish off our application, and that is going to be handling image uploads, which is separate to text content. This is very easy to do with Froala. I'm going to show you how to do that now. There's a few things you need to keep in mind. The first one is the image upload URL. This is the endpoint all images are going to be posted to, regardless of whether you paste them in or insert them from the file picker. The other thing to keep in mind is the response must be in this format. It needs to be an object with a link property, and that's just going to be a link to your image. There's many ways to handle image uploads. I'm going to use a third-party service called Filestack. I find this works really well, and it also has support for many different storage providers. I usually use AWS, but I've also used Google Cloud Storage and Dropbox in the past. Let's go ahead and give this a try. The first thing we're going to do is update our configuration. We're going to set the image upload URL. I'm going to make this one localhost 5555/image. And that's all we need to do on the client side. The rest of the changes are going to be on our server. Let's head over to our server and see how I've implemented that. I'm going to be using a library called Malta. This is just an express middleware which is going to handle files and images. We're then going to create our new post endpoint to image. We're going to only handle single file uploads, and we're going to extract the buffer from request.file, which is made available via this Malta library. I like to keep my endpoints nice and thin and move my logic to a separate module, and that's what I'm doing here. Let's go ahead and take a look at postfile. It is going to receive a buffer as the first argument, and there's a couple of ways we can handle uploading to Filestack. If you have a complex use case, you can go ahead and use their official SDK, and this is how you do it. You just import from Filestack.js, you initialize the SDK and pass in your API key. You can then go client.upload, and there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. In this case, I'm keeping things as simple as possible, and I'm just going to use their post endpoint, which is this Filestack API endpoint. You just need to choose a store. I'm going to be using S3, and then you pass your API key. Finally, you need to pass in the buffer as the body, and you need to set your headers. I'm only going to support PNGs. We're then going to get a response. You can go ahead and do a console log if you'd like to take a look at that. That's exactly what I'm going to do. You need to make sure you do await data.json here. I'm going to log this just to show you what you have available, and then we're going to return an object with the link parameter set to response.url. And this should be all we need to do. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Just going to refresh the page to make sure everything is fresh. I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot, and I'm just going to paste this one in. With a bit of luck, this should be uploaded correctly. If we head over to our terminal, we can see that console log. We have the URL, which is on Filestack CDN. We have the size, the image type, and a temporary file name. Just to verify if this is working correctly, I'm going to refresh the page. And if it's working correctly, our image should still be there, and so it is. The final thing I'd like to do is add a bit of a better user experience. Right now we do automatically save the content, but there's no way of knowing when that was saved. So we're going to use a little toast notification. I'm also going to show you a gotcha and how to use Froala's events. First thing we're going to do is head over to app.vue, and we're going to add some events. I'm going to do that inside of here. There are literally hundreds of events. The one I'm interested in is save.after. And this is going to be called after we finish autosaving. We can do a number of things in here. What I'm going to do is show a toast notification. We're going to do that by using a library, Vue toast notification. The way it works is like this. You can just go ahead and say use toast, and this is going to let us show a notification. I can just go ahead and go to the correct file and say toast.success, and I'm going to say post saved. And now there's one more gotcha you need to keep in mind. The way Froala works with its save after event is this is only going to be triggered if you return a 200 response from your autosave. Right now we're not doing that, we're actually returning a 204, which is what many servers will do. So if you are using the autosave feature, make sure your server responds with a status of 200. That's what I'm going to do now. That should be the final change we need to make everything work correctly. Let's go ahead and give this a try. Come back here and we're just going to add some text. I'm going to say hello world, and with a bit of luck after this finishes saving, we are going to see that notification. And that is working correctly. So that's how you use the events in Froala. There are a whole heap of different events, and I definitely encourage you to go and check them all out. But this does bring us to the end of the application logic. Everything is working as expected. The final thing we need to do is write some tests, so let's go ahead and do that now. Thanks to the Froala and Filestack libraries, we've managed to write a fairly complex and featureful application without writing too much of our own business logic. What we did was focus on integrating several libraries, and for that reason I'm going to choose to write some integration tests. There's a number of tools you could use to do this. I'm just going to use Cypress, since that's the one I'm most familiar with. The goal is going to be testing all the features we've integrated, which includes writing some text and uploading an image, as well as that notification when the post has been finished saving. Let's go ahead and see the test I've written, and then I'm going to walk you through how I wrote it and how I think about testing these sorts of applications. You can see we're writing some text, we're uploading an image, and then we're waiting for that alert to occur. Once it appears, we're going to call the test complete. Let's go ahead now and take a look at the test. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and grab the Froala Editor. I've just created a custom command to make that nice and readable. Because I want my test to be deterministic and run the same every single time, and we don't necessarily have access to the server, I'm going to go ahead and clear out any content that might be there. So we're going to start with a clean slate. I'm then going to type hello world, and we're going to upload an image. The first thing I'm going to do is intercept that endpoint, the image post, and that means I can wait for that to finish, and once it's finished, I know we can proceed with the rest of the test. We're then going to go ahead and insert an image using the file picker, and then we're going to use Cypress's select file to go ahead and upload an image. We're then going to wait for the image post request to finish, and this is indicating that Filestack has finished uploading our image. We're then going to wait again. We're going to wait for this element with the role of alert, which is going to be the post getting saved. Once that's occurred, we know the post is successfully saved, and we're pretty much done. Just to verify everything was saved, I'm going to reload the entire page, and then we're going to assert that both the text we wrote and an image are correctly rendered. This is working. I'm just going to go ahead and show you that one more time, since you've now got a bit more context on what we're doing. We're now waiting for the image upload, we're waiting for the alert, there it is, and everything is passing. Everything is working as expected. That brings us to the end of the application. Everything is working really well, and I'm very happy with how everything turned out. The next thing I'd recommend doing is checking out the rest of Froala's features. It has a huge number of features, and two of my favorite are as follows. The first would be the table feature. This is one of the things that many editors don't get right, and I think that Froala does a really good job of it. Just being able to create tables and move them around, as well as add and remove columns, is really useful. The other feature I really like is the image editing feature. I can go ahead and resize this. You can even move it around, change it, add a caption, and there's many other things that Froala can do. Definitely would encourage you to go ahead and play around and experiment. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.